Okay, welcome. Is that good? Can everybody hear me? Am I close enough? Okay. It's good to see everybody here to celebrate the work and creativity that happens in Lang 120 and LA 178. We have a total of 18 presentations and 18 showcase displays in the lobby, which is a beautiful testament to what we accomplished in the first year here at UNCA. Work that is interdisciplinary, academically rigorous, collaborative, and creative. I'm amazed and honored to facilitate this program this evening. Speaking of facilitators, I want to thank Kent, Sasha, Kevin, and Laurel, who not only set up the space, lights, sound, and all the technical components, but also worked with many of the students on the presentations you're about to see. Thank you, guys. That said, here are some technical logistics. Please make sure your cell phones are turned off or on vibrate. Presenters will follow the order of the program, and we can distribute some of those around as well. Please introduce yourselves and cozy up to the microphone as possible because we want to hear you. There's a binder with a media release form for you to sign because we want to document this event as proof of what's good and possible here at UNCA. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions after each presentation, but as time allows, we will allot a few minutes at the end of both sessions for questions and conversations. So use your programs and jot down your thoughts as you enjoy each presentation. And of course, as we run out of time, which we will, there's opportunities for casual conversations in the lobby and after the program. After the first session, there'll be a 15-ish minute intermission for you to talk with each other, get some food, tour the lobby, and talk with the students who are showcasing their work out there. There's an environmental board game, videos, infographics, how-tos, a comic book, and that's all listed on the back of your program on the second, the other side. Now, I'd like to introduce Jessica Pisano, our writing program coordinator, who is a most beautiful champion to first-year excellence through her support and care for her students and their instructors.
Thank you, Leslie. But what you have to know is Leslie not only gave you the introduction, she's also responsible for making this event possible. She's spent so much time and energy putting this together. And I'm really excited that we get to celebrate all of the work that you've been doing all semester, because I know you've been doing a lot of work all semester long, pre-writing, drafting, revising, and revising, and revising, and revising, right? So this is a chance to celebrate that in here, out there. This event started out as an essay contest. Long time ago, there was a professor here, Peggy Jo Gudger, and they started an essay contest in her name, in honor of her and her work with her students. My predecessor and mentor, Dr. D. James, continued that work. And we're continuing that today, just in a little bit different way, maybe a little updated. So we have a chance for some multi-modality, some all different kinds of composition. But really, this is a celebration of you and your work. And quite honestly, you're absolutely fabulous professors who are here today with us. And so I want to just shift gears for one moment away from the students, and I want to recognize our outstanding first-year writing instructor of the semester award. I'm just going to read a couple of quotes from this professor's student nominations for outstanding first-year writing instructor. Before taking my Lang 120 class, to be honest, I didn't like writing at all. Through this class, though, I learned so much more about my own theory of writing. This professor is always very helpful and patient with all the students when they need assistance on assignments. This instructor is absolutely the best professor of writing I've ever come across. They do a brilliant job of challenging us to write outside the norm while also giving us the freedom to define what writing means to us. They are engaging and vastly knowledgeable. I cannot appreciate more how they've helped me grow and develop as a writer. They beyond deserve this award. But I think my favorite nomination out of all of the nominations for this semester for this particular professor is the one that said, I would not have been able to survive Lang 120 or my first semester if I didn't have this professor. And so please help me in congratulating my dear friend and colleague, Professor Brian Graves.
Hi, I'm Casey Filer. I'm presenting first. My topic was on benevolent media, the faulty representation of the overweight. I chose this topic because I started noticing patterns as I watched a lot of Netflix over the summer, and the patterns just were this. So I defined benevolent media as the inclusion of overweight people in a charitable sense, gives the illusion of acceptance while doing more harm than good. I took this term from benevolent sexism and sort of modified it to cover this topic. Now, the first movie that stood out to me when I was thinking of this prompt was this new Netflix movie. It was released in 2018 called Sierra Burgess is a Loser. It was about this seemingly ugly duckling girl who was not good enough to get the attractive guy by being herself and had to pretend to be a cheerleader online. And it sort of sent the message to the young viewers that you weren't good enough and you had to pretend to be something else. And it got a lot of criticism from news sources and social media. So this is an issue because it includes stereotypes and creates false perceptions of overweight people to its viewers. So it can lead to a harmful environment for overweight people. So stereotypes. There's the fat, funny friend, there's dumb, there's a nerd, self-hating, and in my opinion, most harmful, undesirable. So all of these are characters from TV shows or movies spanning from children's TV shows to classic films and more like widespread popular films. So the fat, funny friend, usually the inclusion of an overweight character is sort of like the chubby, funny guy. He's a supporting character. He really has no meaning other than to be comic relief. There's dumb. Usually overweight people are characterized as aloof in most situations in movies. And the undesirable one, I think, was the most harmful because it just sends a message that if you're overweight, you can't be attractive, and it's almost disgusting to appreciate somebody who is overweight. So in the movie Pitch Perfect, you've got somebody literally named Fat Amy. And all the jokes, her entire storyline is centered around this girl's weight. And they don't really give any more depth to this character. It's just all surface level about her weight. And where the charitable sense comes in is in some of these movies, it's almost like a gift to these overweight characters that they actually found love and acceptance in their peers. So Mall Cop, Kevin James, Paul Blart Mall Cop. This guy he fit almost all of these stereotypes. He was the fat, funny guy. He was dumb. He was nerdy. He didn't notice an entire robbery going on because he was playing Guitar Hero. Self-hating and undesirable. So in the end, it was sort of a gift to him that he actually got this pretty girl. So most people understand that this is a problem in our society, but there isn't that much change in the behaviors that we see in popular media. So if you can see, the most popular so far has been Netflix's TV show Insatiable, about a girl who was overweight and constantly made fun of, never accepted by her peers, but then she got skinny and suddenly she was loved and cared for. And there was huge backlash across social media and news sources saying that this was a fat-shaming mess of a TV show and that it should have been canceled. It was offensive. It was giving false characteristics. But still, it was renewed for a second season and then a third. So these movies and TV shows, we see the problem, but we're not taking action against it. And you'll notice that a lot of these fat-shaming characteristics in movies are actually in kids' TV shows, in kids' movies, where these children are the most susceptible. As young adults and adults, we're able to identify and acknowledge these issues, but children, They just think it's a funny fat guy just eating on TV. They don't notice that this is an issue. So they're getting these perceptions in their heads like, oh, it's okay to make fun of somebody for looking that way. Oh, the reason they're not liked and they're just a side character is because they're overweight. So these trends are happening, but no action's being taken. So what needs to change? We can't keep on writing scripts from a fat perspective because most likely it's written by a skinny, average-looking person. You can't write from a fat experience if you're not fat. You can't. It's always going to come off somewhat sizist, and you're not going to know what it truly is like if you haven't experienced it. So what we also need to do beyond just having new writers and inclusion in these script writing processes is also we need to identify these stereotypes being projected and then take action. We shouldn't greenlight these TV shows if we notice that there's an issue. If we notice that you're gonna get backlash, you're gonna get hatred, you're gonna hurt people. So we need to stop these TV shows and these terrible characteristics from even becoming prevalent in the first place. And here are my works cited. They're very small because I made a collage. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Savina Love, and my project is on sizeism. Sizeism is the discrimination against people based on their weight. For the majority of the project, I'm looking at Monica Geller in the show Friends, but for the beginning, I'm looking at these two pictures of Joey. Joey is like the flirt of the show. He's very like the womanizer. And in the one episode that he's portrayed as fat, he is using the line that he uses to flirt with women as if he's flirting with the food. And kind of like what Casey was talking about, we are using this humor to say, oh, haha, it's so funny because he's fat and he can only flirt with food. Because he's fat, he's food obsessed, and it's the only thing that defines his characteristic. We're focusing on Monica Geller. Monica Geller, there's a repeated joke in the show about how she's overweight and she has this past of being obese. Her brother makes fun of her a lot, saying things like he was scared she was gonna eat him or eat their childhood pet. By glazing over the humor of, haha, it's so funny they're fat, we are still contributing to the idea that fat people can only be fat. So the main character, or we're talking about Monica Geller, this is her, fat Monica. She's portrayed in some episodes in her past as if, what if she was still fat? Fat Monica has oily skin, she's over-blushed as if she's overheating from the weight on her body. She exclusively wears baggy, unflattering clothing, and she's over-exaggerated with her love for food. In this particular episode, she's dancing around her room with a bagel because she's fat and it's funny, she's obsessed with food, that's all she can do. Fat Monica checks all of the boxes of the typical fat person. She's unattractive, she's undesirable, she's unhygienic, and she's obsessed with food. There are a few scenes where they exclusively make fun of her, and that's kind of the only interaction she has. In this scene, Phoebe's just walked out of a bedroom saying that she thinks she's had a heart attack, and Monica's first thought is, did you sit on my Kit Kats? In this scene, Joey's trying to explain how sad and disappointed he feels, and he compares that to how Monica feels about low-fat mayonnaise. And in this scene, it's kind of a roundabout joke about her weight because they're making fun of the fact that she's a 30-year-old virgin. This is a joke on how she's undesirable and no one would have sex with her because she is a fat person. So, there's a definition of sizeism again. BMI is your body mass index. This is often, we see this a lot in like doctor's visits, but it's the ratio of your height to your body weight, and it places people in categories of underweight, overweight, and normal weight. Well, for the overweight, people are often, oh, well, if you're overweight, that's your health issue. only 9% of people in the overweight category BMI's health issues actually stem from their weight. The other 91% come from prior health conditions or family history, but the BMI test discriminates against this because they are immediately thrown into this, if you're overweight, then that's your problem and you're unhealthy because of your own choices. By having this kind of discrimination from the BMI test results, we have these grotesque fat suits, and we are contributing to this, and then we are legitimately putting people's health in danger by ignoring this. While there's discrimination against everyone who is overweight, it's especially hard for women who are overweight. They are portrayed as insecure and desperate for sex in TV. In this episode in particular, Monica has just had sex with Chandler, and her inability to find a sexual partner is enhanced by her over-exaggerated expressions and calling herself a slut. And that contributes to things like hogging. Hogging is a actual real thing. It is a game of sorts that men will play. If they've been rejected by a woman that they wanted to have sex with, when they get rejected, they need an ego boost. So they will go try and find the most unattractive, typically an overweight woman, to go get sexual gratification from. And you win by getting the most unattractive woman in the opinion of your friends. So that's like a real thing. Hogging presents an allegory that being seen as overweight by society makes you less valuable. And our TV shows are contributing to this by having scenes like this where a woman is so overjoyed to have sex with a man that it just lights up her life. So I'm showing the timeline of Monica going from fat Monica, as they call her in the show, to skinny Monica. In an interview, Courtney Cox mentions that the fat suit is supposed to make you look like has added 300 pounds. So we'll keep that in mind. So this is Monica. Monica has a crush on Chandler. Chandler calls her fat. She doesn't like that, so she loses weight. In 1 year, she loses 300 pounds. This is never mentioned in the show that it was an unhealthy way of losing 300 pounds in 1 year, but saying that out loud, everyone can comprehend that that's not a healthy amount of weight to lose in 1 year. But the silence around it shows how blind our media is to sizeism. 33% of actresses on TV right now are underweight but are portrayed as being perfectly healthy. Skinny in our media is portrayed as the only healthy way of life, but healthy is determined by your genetics and is different for every person. But our media is so undesired to the heavier body that we completely ignore this. Ultimately, we can't change what has already been aired, but we can change our views so that when we notice things like this, we don't just let them slide. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kaya Dale, and my project's on the impact of climate change on coastal cities. Coastal cities are the first areas around that will be affected by climate change, and we have to worry about what happens to them because their outcome will show how we will fare against climate change. In my project, I focused on Europe, where 1/3 of the population lives off the coast, which honestly is a huge percentage. And even their coastal cities are feeling huge effects, such as Rotterdam and Venice. Venice has recently been flooded over the past few weeks by 3 different floods that all total to about 6 feet. These floods have been the highest they have been in 53 years in the country. Venice is a good example of the effects of climate change on a city because the government doesn't try to prevent the effects. And even though the city is surrounded by water and it's the whole draw to tourists, they haven't tried to change. With these factors, you would feel like the government should be very adamant about implementing flood barriers, but they have yet to finish a project. And because of that, it has cost them millions of euros from the flood. Another example of a European city affected by climate change is Rotterdam, but Rotterdam has reached a different fate. This map shows the amount of Rotterdam which is under sea level. It is estimated that about 90% of Rotterdam is under the sea level. And since it is a port city off the coast, it would seem doomed to be flooded all the time. Except the city government is very adamant about creating ways to prevent flooding after a huge flood in 1953, where they knew they would have to change if they didn't want their city in grave danger. Now, Rotterdam has a 1 in 10,000 year ratio in the methods that they use to prevent flooding. The different methods they use are shoring up their coasts and using man-made barriers to both keep their ports running and preventing flooding from happening. These two cities with similar makeups have gone into two different directions because of the work put in by the government and the communities around them. They both have had huge floods around 50 years ago, but the government of Rotterdam acted while the Venetian government stayed quiet. In Rotterdam, the government knew that their city was very fragile to floods, and so they decided to change, and with the help of the community surrounding it, was able to create one of the most successful flood prevention methods for a city, and has even created water parks that double as water barriers. They knew that they couldn't just ignore it, especially with climate change on the rise and affecting their city. But the Venetian government turned a blind eye. Their government didn't really care to help. They knew that they needed to put in more work for their city, but they didn't because they wanted to save money. And although they did put in some effort to create flood barriers, it is seen by many as ineffective, too late, and didn't even help prevent the flooding. And this has not only caused grave effects to the Venetian government, but has been very bad for the everyday community of Venice. Although none of us have lived here or even been here, it is to either cities, we have to keep these two examples in mind when we think of what to do and what not to do. In the end, do we want our world to turn into a Venice or do we want it to turn into a Rotterdam? The government has a huge responsibility in implementing change, but it's also up to us to be active groups of citizens. We have to write to the government and help implement change or even recognize our effects on the climate change. But there does have to be a huge change in the environmental movement in order to cause our world to turn into a Rotterdam and not a Venice. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ashley Goodman, and I am presenting Green Burial and how you can reclaim your funeral rights. Before I start, though, this presentation can make some people uneasy. Not many people are comfortable with talking about conversations behind death and death practices, and my presentation does explicitly talk about that and embalming practices. And so if this is not something that you would like to see, then please leave. Don't be triggered by anything. So in order to understand how modern funerals have evolved, we first have to go back and view how funerals used to be. Home funerals used to be the norm within the United States. People would actually have funeral parlors in their own homes where they would have wakes and care for their own dead there, washing the body and doing other ceremonial practices. Until the Civil War came about, when hundreds of thousands of soldiers on the fields were dying, and their families still wanted them to come home so that they could give them proper burials and bury them with respect. This required preservation, because you can't transport a body hundreds of thousands of miles within a few days and not have them be decayed. And so this is when embalming practices first started taking place. And with this brought about caretakers and local cemeteries. These caretakers then became recognized as undertakers, who then became recognized as morticians, who then founded the National Funerals Directors Association. And so now with that out of the way, we can understand the different processes of funeral services. First, you start with visitation. However, most visitations require you to embalm a body first, so we're going to talk about that now. So first step in embalming is washing and disinfecting the body. and then the eyes are glued shut. Then the mouth is either wired or sewn shut. A needle is taken and passed through the lower jaw, up through the gum again, through one nostril, through the septum, through the other nostril, down to the gum again, and down again, and then it's tied. Or the mouth is wired shut, in which a tool called a needle injector is injecting wires into your mouth, and then it's tied and cut so you cannot see it. And then the body is drained of all of its blood from its arteries, and then the arteries are pumped with embalming fluids. What are in embalming fluids? Well, things like formaldehyde, methanol, ethanol, however you pronounce that, and dyes. Why do they add dyes? Well, you add dyes in order to recreate a skin tone, because whenever you die, you lose blood and you lose color in your body, and you need to replicate that again somehow. And then a trocar, which is that instrument right there, is inserted into your abdomen, and it punctures all of your organs. And then your organs are then refilled with your embalming fluid. And then cosmetics are applied in order to bring back that lifelike image that you once had before you passed. And then the deceased is then placed in their casket for the visitation, which is either open or closed. Now, modern funerals are dissected into 3 different categories. You have your visitations, and then you have a funeral service, and then you have your burial services. The funeral service is where memorial services will take place. It's led by either a funeral director or a clergy member. It all depends on whether or not the deceased and the family was religious or not. If religious, then these services include things like prayers and hymns and many words of affirmations. People are also asked to give eulogies in order to honor their loved ones. The burial services are conducted at graves, tombs, mausoleums, crematoriums. It all matters on where your loved one is being laid to rest. And then after these ceremonial practices take place, the casket is lowered into the ground, and then concrete is poured over the casket because it makes it easier to mow the grass. What is green burial? Green burial is defined as the natural burial of bodies in natural settings. This means that bodies are buried without embalming or other preservation methods. They're buried in biodegradable, non-toxic shrouds or caskets so that those too can decay with the body. There's also no headstone that will be used, as headstones require a remarkable amount of resources. Instead, the body is either marked with trees, plants, or flat rocks. However, in order to find your loved one after they are buried, a geotracker is buried with them so that then you can find them again later on. And then the body is able to decompose naturally into the earth, all with about an average cost of $2,000. And with the benefits, you get a reduction of carbon footprints, safer environments, and the conservation of many resources like metals, woods, and also natural habitats. Funeral giants and scams. Many people are very unaware of the funeral industry and how it operates. And because of this, a lot of people can become victim to scamming. The average modern funeral costs around $10,000. And according to the Funeral Rule of 1984 by the Federal Trade Commission, funeral directors are required to give their consumers an itemized price list before any conversations behind funeral services can take place. And also, funeral directors can't require consumers to purchase any unwanted or unnecessary items. However, despite this, many people are still taken advantage of. Like the Graham family. James Graham died in 2017 very suddenly from total organ failure. However, back in 1988, him and his wife purchased a direct cremation plan for about $3,000. Everything was taken care of. In the list, it was told that as soon as he passes, they would call Arbor Memorial, they would come pick up the body and cremate him. So his daughter, Tiffany, did exactly that. However, Arbor responded that in order to cremate her father, she would have to pay an additional $5,000 on top of the already completely prepaid direct cremation. And Tiffany told that this was her financial obligation to pay for these additional services that she did not want. like a $1,400 cremation casket, as opposed to a cardboard cremation casket, which is most commonly used in all practices and is very cost effective. But Arbor said that if she didn't want to pay for this fee, that she could simply pick up her father, put him on ice, and then build him his own casket. The family also asked to see their father one last time before he was cremated, and Arbor declined this request, saying that in order to provide that service, their father would have to be embalmed first in order to spare them from the mental and emotional scarring because of his body being so dead and decayed. This all was about $5,000. And so what did Tiffany do? She walked away with her family and said that she would simply think about it. Whereas in the meantime, she called a different funeral home and arranged a direct cremation for about $2,000, which is what a direct cremation should cost. And then most people would not have the presence of mind to do this, however, unlike Tiffany. They got their money back from Arbor Memorial and an apology from them, saying that they were sorry that their services were inadequate. Now we're getting into how you can reclaim your own funeral rights. You can do so by home funerals. This is the most safe and legal way that you can reclaim your funeral rights. You hold your wake and all of your services in your own home. However, if that is not so much of your speed, then if you're working with a funeral home, ask for a list of your rights. They're already required to give you this in advance, but most people do not abide to this practice. Where you have most control over your burial, however, is in green burials. The family is in charge of all of the services that take place. There's no additional fees, none of that. You are in charge of what happens, and it goes at your own pace. And so to conclude, green burial is a way for caring for the dead with minimal environmental impacts, and it also can restore and preserve natural habitats. And with green burial, you're not only taking back your own death rights, but you're also taking back how you're buried with love, respect, and your own personal comfort. Would anyone here choose a green burial? And then that is all.
Okay. So my name is Molly Fitzgibbons. It is truly a unique experience growing up in small Catholic schools. One endures ugly uniforms, mandatory masses, and a lot of trips to nursing homes. As a little kid, I enjoyed growing up in a small community. As I entered middle school and high school, I came to realize that it was a small community in every way. There was a lot of ignorance and prejudice amongst families, peers, and teachers within the community. I vividly recall my 7th grade theology teacher saying, "When people say, 'Happy holidays,' I always reply, 'and Merry Christmas to you too.'" Another time, a girl next to me in class raised her hand and asked, "Aren't the Jews bad because they're responsible for killing Jesus?" And the teacher could not help but agree with her. At first, these statements didn't really affect or alarm me. I was an indifferent, apathetic 13-year-old. But as I began to develop my own set of morals and beliefs, the significance of these statements hit me and altered my feelings toward religion. I thought, maybe this isn't the kind of stuff I want to be surrounded by. My sophomore year of high school, I switched to a public school. Still, I found myself interested in Christianity, especially after I watched Spotlight. The film covers the unveiling of the clerical sex abuse scandal, as well as the Catholic Church's attempt to cover it up. Before this movie, I had never been aware that this was an issue, much less a worldwide issue. As I grew older and further from the church, my curiosity only deepened. I read a lot of articles about the church's role in the Spanish Civil War. The Nazis and the church sided with the rebels, creating a lot of violence, and the church referred to this as the New Crusade. In 1933, the Vatican made a treaty with Nazi Germany called Reichskonkordat to protect Catholics during the Nazi regime. The Vatican even went as far as to help hide Nazis after World War II. The church also ceased to speak out against the atrocities of the Holocaust or apologize for their part in World War II. Key members of the Vatican supported fascism in Italy. A lot of anti-Semitic literature was being produced by prominent clergy members. The early 1900s were a mess for the Catholic Church, specifically in Spain and Italy. Modern governments were trying to separate from the church and diminish the church's power. The church reacted by causing destruction, specifically during the Spanish Civil War, and publicly adopting racist and prejudiced beliefs. Despite all of this history, what I personally find the most horrific is the widespread molestation and rape of young children, largely by priests. Clerical sex abuse of children has occurred at an absurdly massive scale in the United States, in Canada, in parts of Europe, Asia, and Africa, in Australia, and in New Zealand. Seemingly wherever the church is present, this abuse occurred, including York, Pennsylvania, my hometown. From 2016 to 2018, the grand jury of Pennsylvania began an investigation into clerical sex abuse. In 2017, they attempted to publish a report of their findings, but the Diocese of Greensburg and Harrisburg, which is the Diocese of York, schemed to halt this investigation for fear it would make the church look bad. The report was finally published in 2018 with a list of 301 priests accused of raping or molesting over 1,000 minors. And yes, it did make the church look bad. One report describes a 17-year-old girl who was raped and impregnated by a priest from the Diocese of Scranton. The priest arranged for her to have an abortion. According to the York Daily Record, the bishop of the Diocese of Scranton wrote a letter stating, "This is a very difficult time in your life, and I realize how upset you are. I too share your grief." This letter was addressed to the priest, not to the girl. In 1981, a different priest molested a young boy, and later in life, the boy committed suicide. The priest's name was Reverend Richard J. Berry, and he was a priest at St. Joseph Dallastown, the same school where I endured ugly uniforms, mandatory masses, and trips to nursing homes. Unfortunately, victims committing suicide has occurred in far too many cases. In 2016, Pope Francis stated, "I believe that the church not only should apologize to the person who is gay whom it has offended, but has to apologize to the poor, to exploited women, to children exploited for labor. It has to ask forgiveness for having blessed many weapons." This does not constitute as a direct apology, and he left out the rape and molestation of children. I choose not to affiliate with any religion. The church refers to people like myself as nuns, not to be confused with nuns, which is a very different thing. I like to say that we are called nuns because we want none of it. The majority of nuns are young white liberals. Studies show that this group, more than any other, identifies as atheist or non-religious due to a growing emphasis on individualism and personal freedom. But am I still a nun if I left, not due to personal freedom, but due to disillusionment, disgust, and anger? A lot of studies indicate that there are less religious people because fewer people are growing up in church communities. Other studies claim that those who were raised Christian were more likely as they entered college to become atheist or non-religious. Students themselves claim that in college they felt there was space for questioning and discovery. When I was younger and surrounded by Catholicism, I prayed a lot and took mandatory masses fairly seriously. I enjoyed feeling like I was a part of something, even if it required wearing ugly clothes and spending an absurd amount of time with old people. As I grew more informed, educated, and independent, I came to different conclusions. I am not a hateful person. I do, however, possess a passionate hatred for the Catholic Church. I look at its history, I look at its present, I look at how it has affected my life and the lives of others, and I hate it. I do not, in turn, hate all Catholics. It is the institution I find at fault, as well as the theology. Growing up Catholic and going to Catholic school only gives you one perspective, their perspective. It takes a moral awakening and a keen awareness of self to say, this is not me, this is not who I want to be. Thank you.
So before starting, I'd like to advise a trigger warning. This presentation touches on depression and suicide. For my research, I decided to focus on the suicide rates in the national park system, specifically our Blue Ridge Parkway. Just before Memorial Day weekend of this year, a Boone woman committed suicide on the parkway, marking the fourth suicide in the park in this year alone. Since 2005, 22 people have committed suicide in North Carolina state parks, making suicide the leading cause of death in the park system, behind drowning and cardiac arrest. The Blue Ridge is behind on suicide prevention compared to other national parks, like the Grand Canyon, that have required suicide prevention training for their employees. I believe that if the community of Asheville use our voices to express our concern, that the parkway will improve on training and awareness. But while researching this topic, I struggled in finding what I have. It seems to be something that's not talked about enough in our community, and it began to raise questions on why I was so passionate about it and was refusing to change my topic despite the lack of research. It was because of my own personal experience. On April 13th of 2017, my best friend Carter Mills attempted suicide in my high school auditorium, and on the date of April 21st, he was declared dead after his family made the decision to pull the plug. The feeling of being 15 years old and having to process suicide is something I couldn't wish upon anyone. But through my experience, I realized the lack of suicide awareness and prevention in school systems. Looking back on this made me have another question. How is depression impacting the students of UNCA? So I did further research on college suicide statistics. 8 in 10,000 students die of suicide on college campuses on average, while suicide is the fourth leading cause of death among people the ages of 15 to 24 in North Carolina. And our rates are increasing. With the rates rising, it raised the final question of this being an issue on our campus. So I decided to reach out to students here at UNCA. I've asked them to write letters of their experiences with depression, letting them vent out whatever they needed and respecting their stories for the better understanding of what our students are going through. Their experiences are just a small portion of the stories that are here on our campus, but they are the beginning of the understanding of this issue on our campus and in our society today.
Asking friends and strangers to share their experiences with depression. I had no idea what to expect. Telling me their deepest fears, hopes, and dreams. Things they couldn't tell their friends, family, or loved ones. I hope this film gives you a voice. I hope this film helps you. You are not alone.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Danny.
I'm Graham.
And I'm Riley.
We're presenting a video on plastic pollution titled Plastic Pollution, the Long Road Ahead. In the 1960s, plastic began a revolution. Consumers were excited about the new single-use life. Plastic meant less dishes, cheaper toys, stretchable polyester, technological advancements, and so much more. What consumers didn't know is that a plastic fork that's used for minutes will live on this earth for up to 1,000 years. During that time, the fork will break down into billions of microscopic pieces called microplastics. For 60 years, we have been tying our own noose. Now, we're choking under the weight of an estimated 8.3 billion tons of plastic that is smothering our oceans, waterways, and fragile ecosystems. Half of this material was made in just the past 13 years, and only 9% of the total plastic produced has been recycled. This careless mass production of virgin plastic has led to a challenge like no other in human history: how to clean it up. What do we do about the trash islands in the Pacific Ocean? How do we make sure our drinking water is clean? And how do we make sure that none of this happens again?
Most products in use today contain some sort of plastic. In total, almost 2 million tons of plastic is being produced annually worldwide. Most of this plastic eventually ends up in our oceans due to anything from poor consumer habits to shipping spills. Because plastic is so slow to break down, it can wash up on shores hundreds of miles from its origin. Without realizing, we've allowed about 40 million plastic bottles and 500 billion plastic bags to reach our oceans, affecting a huge range of ecosystems. 80% of plastics circulating in the oceans are believed to come from pollution off the shorelines, with 20% from fishing gear, boats, and ships. About 10,000 shipping containers fall into the ocean each year. The North Pacific Ocean now contains around 5 to 10 million tons of plastic, forming a plastic island. This island is actually a huge, solid, floating clutter of plastic pieces that extend deep into the ocean called a garbage patch. Scientists have discovered more of these garbage patches that have just as much plastic, if not more. When these plastics reach our shorelines and oceans, they can harm marine wildlife by getting caught around necks or in stomachs. Sea turtles have ingested plastic bags, thinking it could be a jellyfish, and then died due to stress. Cetaceans, such as dolphins or whales, will also ingest stray plastic in the ocean, causing them to die and sink into the ocean's floor. Even birds, such as pelicans or seagulls, are affected. Many seabirds eat zooplankton, and thus can't tell what is plastic and what is not due to color and size. They ingest this plastic, which harms their digestive system. Female birds who have offspring are not only harming themselves, but they are also feeding some of this plastic to their young ones, unknowingly poisoning them.
The plastic fork that we threw away will break down over the next 1,000 years into billions of particles called microplastics. Microplastics are becoming such a problem in areas of the ocean, particularly near the trash islands, that the water looks cloudy and murky. These particles come from the billions of tons of plastic floating around in the ocean and degrading in sunlight. Microplastics can also come from the wearing down of rubber tires on asphalt, plastic beads in soaps, processing facilities, and plenty of other places. These particles can be highly toxic. Some argue that since there is no way for organisms to process the plastic, the particles are inert and pass through without any harm. This often isn't the case, as these particles are very good at picking up POPs, or persistent organic pollutants. These are highly toxic chemicals that come from pesticide runoff, medical waste burning, manufacturing, and industrial applications. Organisms at the bottom of the food chain, like zooplankton, uptake these particles, and as their predators and the predators of the predators travel up the food chain, microplastics accumulate in tissue. Yes, we are part of that food chain too. Microplastic is the new mercury when it comes to seafood.
Up until just a few years ago, plastics were created to last as long as possible. Now the game is changing. Bioplastics are made from organic material and intentionally break down much faster than petroleum-based plastics. The two most common types of bioplastics are polylactic acid, PLA, and polyhydroxyalkanoate, PHA. PLA is typically made from plant fibers, such as corn, while PHA is usually made inside engineered microorganisms. Both are much more biodegradable than petroleum plastics, and PHA is even used for things like medical sutures because it can biodegrade harmlessly inside the human body. The largest issue with bioplastics right now is that they can't be recycled in the same way as we're used to. They may be compostable, but if you can't find a compost bin, they'll probably end up in the recycling bin where they could contaminate an entire batch of some other type of plastic. Also, bioplastic production can still have side products. PLA made from plant fibers, often corn, requires a large land area to grow stock, which competes with food production and uses more pesticides and fertilizers. There is a light on the horizon, though. These problems are largely to do with scale and infrastructure. As the use of bioplastic increases, awareness and access to proper disposal will rise. Now, the road ahead won't be easy or short, but change is possible. And in the meantime, using more alternatives to traditional plastic can prevent the problem from growing. We can't afford to become complacent, but through diligence and changing the way we think about plastic, the mess we've gotten our planet into can be fixed.
The climate crisis. How does that make you feel? Angry? Anxious? Burdened? Wrong? We are all feeling these things in some way or another about this impending climate crisis, and we all have different ways of coping. Some volunteer in environmental causes, some try to ignore it altogether, and some people try to protest. In this presentation, I'm going to be exploring with you the optics and visibility and multimodality of climate protest. In exploring these, the visibility and multimodality of climate-safe organizations, I decided to look into Extinction Rebellion, Sunrise Movement, and Fridays for Future. Extinction Rebellion originated in the UK and characterizes themselves as one of the most radical nonviolent activism groups. Their theory of change is to fight the system. The way they do this is by causing such an uproar and disruption to daily life as usual by getting arrested. And so, yeah, their goal is to get arrested. They use these arrests to gain attention from the public and to raise concern about the climate crisis. The Sunrise Movement is a national movement that is youth-led, and this organization's theory of change involves working within the existing political system to enact change. They gain public awareness by organizing massive strikes and sit-ins to elect a presidential candidate into office that will champion the Green New Deal. And Fridays for Future is an international movement that grew quickly from 16-year-old Greta Thunberg from Sweden, who school striked for climate. Most of the members from Fridays for Future are school-aged children under 18. Because of the nature of the age of these children, Fridays for Future does not encourage radical, arrestable action. Their theory of change focuses on school striking, raising awareness, and using their image as youth to their advantage in the media. Despite all these differences and theories of change between these organizations, they all have something in common, which is they have handheld signs or banners. These handheld signs or banners are designed with specific linguistic and stylistic branding elements that evoke strong, long-lasting emotional reactions amongst the intended public audience. This is an example of a Extinction Rebellion protest. Their branding employs primarily the color green or solid color backgrounds, bold black blocky lettering, and the stylized hourglass logo that represents time is up. They have flags with these hourglasses, and most of their signs and banners are made out of cloth or vinyl. Their optics and visibility tactics uses placement of a large banner at the front and smaller banners and a massive crowd at the back that back the banner. Common phrases you will see are rebel for life, emergency or climate emergency, nonviolent and join us, Stop denying that our Earth is dying. And climate change is mass murder. Extinction Rebellion focuses on evoking climate anxiety within their audience. On the other hand, a Sunrise protest focuses on the hope that youth have for their future. They focus on the sentiment for the resources and people we already have. Sunrises uses yellow, black, and gray as the colors of their brand, t-shirts, shields, and the sunrising background. They also have people of color as the face of their movement because the 2 women who started Sunrise are women of color. Most of their signs are made out of cardboard or cloth. Common phrases seen are for the air we breathe, for the water we drink, for the people we love, and for the places we call home. We also say, Green New Deal now. What is your plan? Which side are you on? Step up or step aside, and good jobs or a livable future. This is actually a picture of a strike that I was in Nashville. This was a sit-in in the mayor of the Nashville's office on his first day. I'm over there on the left. I'm holding up a banner. And this is just to show the multimodal strategy and the optics strategy. At first, the door was open, and the camera woman told us to close it. She placed us all so that we were lined up, and we took up more space in the room. The room was small, and so that worked to our advantage because we only had about 15 people sitting in, and it made us look larger. All of the signs are visible, and all of our faces are visible. This lends us credibility to the movement, to the public, to back us. Fridays for Future doesn't really have a lot of branding. It's mostly very inclusive because it's really just a group of young people that come together and strike. It's not very complicated, and it doesn't have to worry about branding or optics very much. Most of the signs are made of cardboard or cardstock. Common phrases seen are, there is no planet B, the climate is changing, why aren't we, stand for what you stand on, school strike for climate in Swedish, system change, not climate change, you'll die of old age, we'll die of climate change. And since there's no set standard for branding or signs, people can take creative liberty with their signs, including puns and references to pop culture. And some people very much enjoy their creative freedom. So why does this matter to me? It matters because this is my future, and this is all of our futures as youth and as people who live on this planet Earth. And I also care about the public gaining awareness and being inspired to act on this because we all have the ability to change this problem. And why does this matter to you as writers? It matters because in multimodal and optic strategy are extremely effective in hooking your readers and hooking your audience. It matters because you want to evoke emotion in whoever you're talking to. And to the general public, it matters because climate change is happening, but we can all do something to change it. And I also just have a plug because there's a climate strike happening on Friday that you should totally go to. It's from 10:40 to around 12:30. There's going to be a march around downtown, and then there's going to be a strike, and we've got so many amazing things planned. So be there. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Bridget Kirby, and I am in Leslie Johnson's Lang 120 class. I'll be presenting some of our collaborative projects. During the first week of class, we read the poem I Am From by Mary Pfeiffer. We used this as inspiration to write our own poems, and then we collaborated, and the following poem is a collaboration by the students of Lang 120. Our generation has it all the weight of the world. For example, the sound of the metal detectors used to annoy me because they would always make me late. Some dumbass was always trying to bring in homemade shiv or backwoods. But I am from the center of culture across the country and the most beautiful skyline in the world. I am from the loud roaring trains of the night, from more caffeine than blood pumping through my veins, from the wild berries whose brambles still scratch my legs when I try to forget. I am from lines of clothing decorating my veranda and piles of books imitating statues around my room. We're all so lucky to be here. We love to fall in love with life again every day and find joy in the little things. I am from tucks in bed and kisses on foreheads, from a humble place. I am from quality over quantity, unconditional love, and Southern hospitality. From Dolly and Reba, cornbread and biscuits, and shared family gardens. I am from acceptance, love, and positivity. People can change. The kids are grown, they've all left home, with journals full of memories. It's not easy to know what I want to be or who I really am. I don't know what I want. I want to know what I want. When so much is expected, we do the unexpected. I am not a cookie-cutter person. I am unique. I am paint spread on a blank canvas. From dogwood trees and dandelions, from soft music and hard exteriors. We are from a world that doesn't seem so dark anymore.
Hello, I'm Sydney Haga. I'm in Leslie Johnson's Lang 120 class, and I'd like to present what we've been doing in class recently. So from our collaborative I Am From Poems, we started working on our collaborative little library projects. It's a virtual little library with 4 different groups, 4 different themes, and 4 different locations with different audiences. Let's open the conversation of what forms of media have inspired you, how our favorite books, songs, movies, even video games all relate to each other, and how these little libraries could impact our audience. Some examples. We have the Pushing Boundaries texts. This includes a video game called Stardew Valley, the Human Centipede movie, and even The Office. Then we have our music little library with popular artists such as Jack Johnson, Macklemore, Lil Wayne, and J. Cole. Some empowering stories of survival and resilience, and even a crime little library. So our class was based around conversations this past semester, and we went on to do research that involves a conversation we're interested in, whether it's vaccines or children's books or anything. So to conclude, I'd just like to say how proud I am of all my fellow Lang 120 students. We've all come a long way from where we're from.
Hi, my name is Mia Goldsboro, and today I'll be talking about biodiversity, which is the many different forms of life in an ecosystem. I'll be discussing the loss of biodiversity and the causes and effects, mainly by humans. There are 5 main causes to the loss of biodiversity, which are habitat alteration, invasive species, overharvesting, pollution, and climate change. So the first one is going to be habitat alteration, which is the #1 threat to biodiversity. So the first animal I'm going to be discussing is the macaw, which macaws are endangered due to deforestation. Habitat alteration is responsible for 83% of mammals declining and 85% of birds declining. So this is a forest, I don't know which one, but obviously this displays deforestation. And forests cover 30% of the world. About 17% of the Amazonian rainforest is destroyed. We depend heavily on forests due to oxygen and materials like wood. So the next topic I'm going to be discussing is palm oil. So palm oil is a very, very bad ingredient for the environment because palm oil is a vegetable oil. It is derived from a fruit that comes from the palm oil tree. So palm oil is since it's derived, a lot of places like Borneo and Sumatra rainforest have to cut down all the trees to make palm oil plantations. This is a palm oil plantation, and this affects orangutans the most because orangutans are endemic species, which means that they could only be found in Borneo and Sumatra rainforest. Due to the rise of the demand of palm oil, forests are being destroyed and displacing animals, especially orangutans. In the past 10 years, the orangutan population has decreased by 50%. So, yes. Our next topic is going to be invasive species. This means that a species that is not native to a specific location. Usually, these species cause damage to the environment, and 42% of threatened or endangered species are at risk due to invasive species. So, the first invasive species of North America is the European honeybee. They are very important to our ecosystem because we rely on them for food. However, they outcompete native bees for food, and they have introduced mites and parasites from their native home, which is obviously Europe. The next invasive species is kudzu. It is native to Japan and China and can grow a foot long in a day during the summer. Kudzu kills anything in its path, can overtake other plants, trees, and houses, and basically suffocates anything beneath it. Our next topic is overharvesting, which means to harvest something excessively and especially to a harmful degree. This depletes natural resources, which can lead to resource destruction. So the first one that I'm going to be talking about is overfishing. So fishing disrupts the marine food chain, and fishing is one of the most significant drivers of declining fish populations. Billions of people rely on fish for their food source, so this affects those people too. In just 55 years, humans have managed to wipe out 90% of the ocean's top predators. And this is a photo of a facility that correlates to overfishing. The next topic that I'm going to be discussing is poaching, which is illegal hunting or capturing of wild animals. Elephants are being killed every day for their ivory tusks, and 20,000 are being killed yearly, obviously resulting in a declining population. China happens to be one of the biggest consumers of ivory. And the photo on the right is a place in China that founded a place that was keeping illegal ivory. Next topic is going to be pollution. This is the introduction of contaminants into the natural environment that can cause adverse change. Plastic pollution is a huge problem, as everyone knows. Every year, about 8 million metric tons of plastic enter the oceans. Plastic also takes years to degrade. A water bottle can take up to 450 years to decompose. Obviously, plastic affects wildlife, marine wildlife, and these animals either digest or get entangled into the plastic. This is a photo of a bird that has eaten too many plastic items and have died. This is a photo of a turtle being entangled. The next pollution I'm going to be talking about is nutrient pollution. It is the process of over-enrichments, waste, and fertilizers entering a waterway. This causes harmful algae blooms to grow, which depletes the water of oxygen, which results in dead zones, which means that nutrient pollution can cause massive fish kills. The algae blooms can clog fish gills and block out sunlight from entering the waterway, and nutrient pollution can cause acid rain, which further affects organisms. Next is climate change. We all know what climate change is, but the symbol for climate change is the polar bear. And effects of climate change, it causes more intense natural disasters, sea levels rising, ice melting, and more intense droughts. The causes of climate change is the combustion of fossil fuels. This is the Arctic. This is a starving polar bear that has been affected by climate change. So why is biodiversity important? Biodiversity boosts ecosystems. It provides ecosystem services such as purification of water, medicinal purposes. It stabilizes the climate, maintenance of ecosystem, and it restores everything within the environment. How to save biodiversity, ecological restoration, preservation, which means preserving land for animals, conservation, conserving land, and protect hotspots, which are locations that have a plethora of endemic species and legal protection like the Endangered Species Act. How can you help? You can consume wisely, you can reduce, reuse, recycle, save energy, avoid plastics, and go organic. Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name is Alex Guilfoyle, and today I'm going to be presenting the causes of marine species extinction in the Gulf of California and its impacts. Alright, so let's get some background on extinction. Extinction itself is a natural process and has been occurring since the Earth first started, but the rate at which extinction occurs has widely varied. Today, the extinction rate is 1,000 to 10,000 times the rate that it was back in the Pleistocene epoch period, which is the period in which we had our last ice age. Throughout time, there have been many natural reasons for species to go extinct. According to the UN Environment Program, species can naturally go extinct if they are unable to evolve fast enough to meet changing circumstances, or if their niche disappears across its natural habitat. But neither of these causes of extinction are as common as the amount of species going extinct daily, which is equivalent to one species dying off every 60 seconds. Impacts of extinction. So until quite recently, many scientists believed that we couldn't possibly destroy marine species populations because of how easily they are able to avoid traps and how quickly they multiply. Our notions of how much of an impact we as humans are able to have on our world we live in has dramatically changed thanks to new research, and is more than likely to change even more in the coming years. So some example species. Specific species that are currently on the brink of extinction or are critically endangered within the Gulf of California would be the Toa-toba fish and the vaquita. Now, what is a vaquita, you may ask? And how do they connect? Well, the vaquita is a species of porpoise that is endemic to the northern part of the Gulf of California. The vaquita is on the brink of extinction, with an estimated 6 to 22 individuals left on the planet. The word vaquita is Spanish for little cow, and many people often confuse the vaquitas with dolphins, but they are smaller, about 5 feet in length, have a chunkier body, and a rounded head with no snout. Vaquitas are very shy, private creatures, and little is actually known about them. They weren't discovered until quite recently, 1958, when 3 skulls were discovered on a beach north of Punta San Felipe in Baja California. The unfortunate part about how these two species are connected are the tools being used to kill them. Gill nets. To get further into this threat, I turn to the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, who states that if fishery bycatch is not eliminated immediately, the vaquita may go extinct within this year. Nearly 1 out of every 5 vaquita get entangled and drown in gill nets intended for other marine species like the Toa-toba, which is a critically endangered fish also found in the upper Gulf of California, whose swim bladder is worth more than gold. Some action steps. There are currently many organizations that are doing whatever they can to help the Sea of Cortez. Even the US Navy has gotten involved with the rescue of the vaquita populations. They're simply trying to capture a few vaquitas and keep them safe until the region is free from the illegal fishing. But the unfortunate part about this idea, according to Dr. Phil Miller, a population biologist working with the CPSG, or Conservation Planning Specialist Group, is that there have been many failed attempts at capturing any of the last vaquitas. Anytime they are able to successfully find and bring one onto the boat, the vaquita would become more and more stressed. And once the vaquita was put into a sea pen, the stress would cause it to eventually die. Since these attempts, they have called off further rescue efforts and have turned to simply protecting the area in which the vaquitas are located. Future of the Gulf. One of the broadest and simplest things that should be done to help the Sea of Cortez would be worldwide education on the topic. The vaquitas being such an unknown species is a key piece to their demise. If more people around the world knew about this animal and what was going on in the Gulf of California, there would be more pressure on the Mexican government to do something to stop the extinction at hand. More specifically, the Chinese population needs to be educated on this problem and how their intake of the toba toba soup is causing the species to go extinct. We should also educate them further on the true abilities medicinally that the toba toba swim bladder actually has. We need to pressure our government into ending all seafood imports from Mexico until their ban on gillnet fishing is properly enforced. The Mexican government also needs to provide more resources to the fishermen who are interested in continuing their legal fishing so that they can get enough money to support their families. The Chinese government also needs to enforce the trade ban of the toba toba swim bladder by having higher security at customs to stop the bladders from entering the country. They also need to provide more training to their security teams who are going to fish markets to search for the toba toba swim bladders. And in conclusion, when the buying stops, the killings will too. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to me. Please have a great rest of your night. Keep the vaquitas in your mind and be conscientious of what is going on to our planet and its inhabitants. We are their only voice.
We have a podcast, so I'm going to leave that right there just so it doesn't start playing when we start talking. I'm Madison. This is Jade. Anna, unfortunately, could not be here today. Let me introduce the class.
Oh, yeah. So we're from Dr. Kuzo's class, and the class that we're in basically teaches about climate change and how it's impacting us. So the topic of our podcast is on positive and negative feedback loops as they relate to climate change.
Yeah, and to start, although Professor Evan Kuzo isn't here right now, he was earlier, and just a testament, he has a very unique way of teaching, and I think it's very impressive because he's able to educate us and entertain us at the same time, and he kind of gave us that goal in this assignment. He told the whole class pretty much that your I guess, goal in this podcast was to find an entertaining way to educate people on kind of a complex and scientific topic which people don't always find enjoyable to listen about. In our podcast, we broke it up into two segments, a morning session and an evening session. We took callers and we had very embarrassing mimic voices, which we are including in are not including in our excerpts that we're picking. We are picking the introduction and the conclusion, and I'll just start real quick. Good morning, everyone. This is Madison, Anna, and Jade from UNC Asheville. Let's see if we can push through our grogginess for our Climate Change and Daily Life podcast this morning. We're going to be doing something special today. You're now able to call in to make comments or ask questions, but before we start, Jade, how'd you sleep?
You know, I'm not gonna lie, I haven't really been doing that sleep thing, Matt. I feel like I'm stuck in a cycle.
Ooh, must be the procrastination cycle. I know it pretty well, and it's brutal. You lose sleep because you're stressed.
And because you're stressed, you avoid what's stressing you. And in the case of a college student, that stressor is homework.
Yeah, and then your work piles up because you procrastinated and...
Oh my gosh, you lose even more sleep because you've been stressing over all the work that you happen to let pile up.
Because you procrastinated.
Yeah, it's so terrible because it's self-reinforcing.
That reminds me, do you guys remember the class that we took together in our freshman year of college? It was the 178 seminar, I believe.
Oh yeah, with Professor Kuzo. We learned about climate change and the inevitable destruction of the earth.
Yeah, you know, Jade, I think the cycle you found yourself in is a positive feedback loop. But don't be misled, it's not positive at all.
Okay. Just so we save ourselves from your dry humor, let's take our first caller this morning. I wonder if anyone else is suffering the way I've been.
Hello! Welcome to our Climate Change and Daily Life podcast. What's on your mind?
Howdy. Can y'all explain more about this positive feedback thing? 'Cause I like positive feedback. Compliments are great, but I have a feeling we're not talking about the same thing.
All right, well, let's clear that up for you. The positive feedback we're talking about here is about the climate. In this case, the loop ends and begins with an increase in temperature.
And for example, the ice melting in the North Pole is a positive feedback loop. The temperature increases and it causes the ice to melt. When ice melts, it creates more dark surface, and the dark surface absorbs heat. So when more heat's absorbed, temperature increases. See, we started and finished with an increase in temperature, showing that it's self-reinforcing and a cyclic effect.
Hey, that was pretty good.
Okay, so just to outline some of the things that we did in the introduction was we tried to make it something that people can connect to, because when you have a very important issue like climate change, you need to let people care about it. And it's hard to get people to care about something if they can't relate to it in some way. And because we're college students, we have all seen procrastination affect us. We all know how easy it is to fall into that cycle. And that is very similar to the positive feedback loops that we do see in our environment in terms of pollution. And the example we used being the melting of the ice and how the dark surface allows us to absorb more heat and then melt more ice. So just so you can see what we did there, it was about letting our audience connect to what we're talking about and at the same time learn about a complex issue. Now we're going to jump to, hopefully I clicked the right spot, the conclusion. And here we talk about the negative feedback loops, which are self-defeating and are good for the environment.
But there's less of them.
Very few examples of them, which is a bad thing for the environment. But here's one we can discuss.
So a good example of a negative feedback is chemical weathering. If you don't know what that is, the chemicals we put in our atmosphere accelerate the erosion of rocks and minerals. And certain rocks on the surface of the Earth actually play a key role in the absorption of CO2, which is carbon dioxide. This decreases the temperature, but the more exposed these rocks are, the more CO2 is absorbed, reducing the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, thus reducing the temperature.
That's a good way to explain it, Jade. And for more simple-minded people like me, another way to think about it is when you drink alcohol. Your liver works harder to get rid of the toxic chemicals that you've consumed. And when you consume out of moderation, you can severely damage your liver. Well, the Earth has stage 4 liver cancer, jaundice and it all, and it's because we've forced our atmosphere to consume too much CO2, which is a toxic chemical, and now our atmosphere is taking it in out of moderation.
Remember, negative loops are in the minority. They act as a very minute buffer to the oncoming blast that is global warming.
And we'd like to make it clear, with all of the lightheartedness that we express throughout today, it is important to understand it is a falsified glorification of the serious issues we are facing.
Our world is in serious danger, or at least the human species has put itself at risk, considering the fact that the Earth is able to withstand far more than us, and we only have ourselves to blame.
And before we close out, I want you to think about the classic chips and dip dilemma. The reason there's never enough chips or never enough dip is because of you. You are responsible for taking a disproportionate amount of dip. Because, this imbalance cannot be blamed on anyone other than yourself. And eventually you're not going to have any more dip to buy. You're not going to have the money for it, or you ate it all, and now there's none left at the grocery store, so no one gets any dip because you've eaten all the dip because you're selfish, gluttonous, inconsiderate, ignorant, and you're a son of
All right, okay. That is all for today. Thank you for sticking with us for another day of 100 Analogies on Climate Change and Daily Life podcast.
Okay, so we tried to use comedy and humor to help illustrate our message, but we did touch on it somewhere in there that this is a very serious issue, and using comedy and analogies and funny ways to get people to listen to you talk about something they didn't originally care about. It is one way for you to approach doing this on your own. If you make a website through the school, that we have fortunately a great opportunity to do that, you can always record your own podcast in the Media Design Lab. You can always educate people in your own way, different forms of writing, as someone previously taught us about, which is really interesting and fun to learn about. And he could even make a podcast and tell people about that. So hopefully we inspired you to do something and educate people on this serious issue. Thank you for listening.
My name is Evie Horton. I'm from Professor Magaha's Lang 120 class. And unfortunately, my partner, Taylor McKeon, couldn't be here today, so I'll be presenting for both of us. So for my research project, I decided to research environmental art and Taylor decided to research photojournalism. And so we decided that both of our projects encompassed activism throughout art. So as to branch off of both of our research projects, we decided to make a presentation on local activist art. And please enjoy the flare. So what is activist art? Activist art addresses the local injustices as well as educates and empowers the community. The artist will also include a sort of call to action for the viewer. And it is everywhere. You just have to know where to look for it. And so we provided in this presentation several examples of places as well as artists that encompass activist art. The first place is the Pit of Despair. It is located in downtown Asheville on Haywood Street, and it is a vacant lot that was sort of notorious for a lot of crime and not a really good place to be. So now local artists have sort of transformed it into a really cool place where people can come together and enjoy the community. And there are even some murals that feature local graphic designers. So far, the fate of the Pit of Despair is not yet finalized, but so far they're having a pretty cool event space with local farmers markets that come in and people want to hang out and get together and have lunch. So yeah, it's a really cool place on Haywood Street. And also on Haywood Street is the Haywood Street fresco, which was commissioned by the Haywood Street congregation. And it provides the church's vision of the Asheville community. So the artist included all of the subjects that are homeless or were formerly homeless in the fresco. And he, designed it to be a sort of classical Renaissance style. And so he just wanted to spread goodwill and acts of compassion throughout the community. And the fresco was also inspired by the Beatitudes or the Sermon on the Mount. And another place is the Burton Street Garden, Peace Garden. This was started by Safi Mahaba and Dwayne Barton in 2003. And it was first inspired by the war in Iraq and the war on drugs that was taking place in the US. And so local artists come in and they mostly use found objects, which I think is really cool. And create these really beautiful pieces that all sort of relate back to the theme of social and environmental injustice, as well as Black history within the community. And the last place that we have is the Love Your Community Container Project. So this sixth grader in Asheville, Trinity Harper Pierce, won a contest that was sponsored by the Pink Dog Creative to design a mural for this double-decker container. So she decided to speak about love and spread the message of love throughout her community. And so we have a quote by her that we thought was really, really cool. So there was a lot of violence in my neighborhood. I want people to care more about their community. When they drive by and see this, I hope that their hearts grow as big as the heart in the painting. I want the love to spread all throughout my community, my city, and my county. So we also had the opportunity to meet with 3 really, really cool artists and personally get to talk to them. So the first artist is Ken Valerio, and he identifies himself as a futuristic radical artist. And so throughout his paintings, he focuses on discovering the truth throughout his work. And he includes how the patriarchy is still very evident within the art community today and wants to try to battle consumerism and the exploitation of the art community. So I also made a video that further shows what Valerio and I talked about.
Walking into Wedge Studios in the River Arts District, I was automatically drawn to Ken Valerio's work. I have had the chance to speak with him before, but not about his activism that is reflected throughout his work. Valerio explained his dislike of the overproduction of art that has little to no meaning behind it and is only meant to generate a profit. He also discussed the patriarchal history of art and how women were kept out of the art world. However, male artists included women within their work, thus giving them access to the art world, but in a more abstract way. To Valerio, art history is a key component to becoming a real artist. To approach a blank canvas without the knowledge of the art that came before modern society is a missed opportunity and a lack of understanding of what art really is. Valerio gives the example of cave paintings and how he believes it is the foundation of humanity. Cave paintings were the start of human enlightenment. There is no way to figure out the gender of these ancient painters, but Valerio believes they were women. In his experience and perspective, Valerio has come to the conclusion that female artists are more in touch with their work than male and create art for their own benefit rather than creating it for the benefit of consumerism. Valerio notices the physical and mental strength women possess and attempts to include it throughout his work. Because of the oppressive patriarchy that is still present in the art world, female artists don't know how good they are. Valerio is helping to change that. When deciding what to do with a blank canvas, Valerio sees it as a journey of discovery that has infinite possibilities. He believes that art, to quote, is the pursuit of the truth, and with every painting, he intends to discover something new.
So the next artist that I got to meet with is Jessica C. White. She's a printmaker and also the art teacher at Warren Wilson College. And she believes that art is communication. So with every print she makes, she's trying to communicate something to the viewer. And these are some examples of her earlier prints. And throughout these prints, you can see that ecocentrism is reflected, and she also focuses on the human impact with the environment. And she also believes that her art is a self-portrait. She wants all of her art to have a piece of herself. And she chose printmaking because it can be accessible and made in the multiple, and as well, it is available to the masses. So I also made another video just to showcase her work a little bit more closely. The last artist that I met with is Callie Ferrero Ares, and she identifies as a mixed media artist. And through her latest project, she is addressing the stigma of mental health. She wants to normalize and spread awareness throughout her art, and she's really proud to recognize mental health, and she felt a sort of resilience with this new project. She also wants her art to be a sort of memoir of herself, that each piece is a memory of some important time in her life. And so this is her artist statement, and I also have a print that she gave me to share with you all, and as well as another copy of her artist statement. So I'm just going to pass that around if you want to take a look. And throughout her work, she uses pill bottles and Barbie as these really iconic images that people can relate to. She actually told me that, I think it was some crazy number, like 90% of the world's population can recognize Barbie's face. So she wanted to sort of normalize mental health, that it's something that all humanity has to deal with, that we can all come together and sort of relate to. And Taylor and I would really like to encourage you guys to all go out to Asheville, explore these really cool places, especially in Wedge Studios where all of these artists are working. They're really, really cool. They would love to talk to you and they love to talk about their work. So we really encourage you to go out and explore. Thank you.
Right. So my presentation is about the Japanese birth rate crisis. It is called An Insider Look at Japan's Birth Rate. Basically, Japan is facing an increasingly irreversible, steady decline. Here we can see the actual decline up to the year 2005, as well as the projected decline up to the year 2055. And the working age population has plummeted and is projected to plummet further, and the estimated child population in 2055 is a mere 10 million. Problems start to arise as soon as young adults in Japan enter the workplace. Few young adults in Japan prioritize dating as a result of a brutal work culture and rigid gender roles. 49% of unmarried women and 61% of unmarried men ages 18 to 34 are not in a relationship. 39% of women and 36% of men aged 18 to 34 are virgins. The reasons go beyond just being too busy for it and also include the issue of herbivore men, who are young Japanese men who show more interest in women online on TV and in idol groups than they do the women in their own lives. And women have stated in surveys that they look for a partner who makes more money than they do, which is difficult for a lot of young Japanese men in the current economy. 1 in 4 men and 1 in 7 women remain unmarried by the age of 50. And nearly a whole quarter of all women aged 30 to 35 are unmarried. Again, economic issues seem to be the leading factor in this issue, as Japanese people, especially women, tend to put off marrying until they and their partner are both financially secure, and Japanese men continue to seek the traditional homemaker wife in partners, which there are far fewer women who are willing to do that compared to, say, 20 or 40 years ago. There's the question of why, if many women do actually have the stable jobs and good husbands needed to make a family, do they still often put off having a child or having like more than just one child? Is bigger than can be covered in one slide and is the topic of the rest of the presentation. Meet Aiko. Aiko is a recently married 32-year-old woman with a secure office job and an upper middle class education. Her husband, he exists, but men in Japan typically have jobs that consume so much of their time that they're rarely home, and some even move halfway across the country for promotions, leaving their family behind them. Aiko wants to have a baby, but she didn't expect this. This slide is about the state of healthcare for pregnant women in Japan. Aiko receives from the government a lump sum of about 420,000 yen per child, but an average cost of delivery alone is usually around 500,000 yen. Any complications and checkups are paid for out of pocket. The Japanese hospitals overwhelmingly prefer natural birth. Only 5% of deliveries involve anesthesia compared to 60% in America and 80% in France. As the saying goes, suffering is a virtue. This attitude seems to apply to most aspects of life as a Japanese mother. After she had her child, Aiko is excited to go back to school. I don't think she expected this either. This slide is about maternity harassment, a common issue in Japan. Before she became pregnant, Aiko had received an email telling female workers to work out a schedule for taking turns with pregnancies in order to prevent workplace distraction, and her boss publicly berated her for breaking it. Aiko finds herself taken off the career track and prevented from any further opportunities for promotion. This is a real story that actually happened to a Japanese woman and is practiced in multiple Japanese companies, not just one. Aiko realizes she needs to balance work and family better, but it's not that easy. This slide is about the state of childcare in Japan. After some time, Aiko quits her job, as 70% of Japanese women do after first having a baby. A few years later, she begins working again, but she can only find temporary work with unpredictable hours. But since the waitlist for daycares are a mile long, she's stuck with the average 5 hours of housework wives in Japan do and childcare with no help. Her husband only does an average of 1 hour per day compared to hers. But turns out Aiko's husband is also super important too, and he wants everyone to know it. Like many young men in Japan, Kentaro has struggled with having a long-time job, but he is also significantly more involved in his child's life than his father was. At least he tries to be. Kentaro is suing the last company he was fired for paternity harassment, as more Japanese fathers have been doing in recent months. This slide is about the increasing amount of fathers getting involved in their children's lives and the backlash they face from workers, as well as the lack of support from the government, which tends to throw their support behind the big companies, even though they supposedly are committed to raising the birth rate. Aiko turns on the news. This slide is about recent news issues and events that are related to the birth rate crisis that may not seem obviously related to them. 2 more workers die of karoshi-related deaths. Karoshi deaths refer to literally death by overwork. It is overwork to the point of either detrimental health or causing suicides. Response to the Me Too movement has been muted, despite the fact that sexual harassment is just as prevalent there as it is here. This is because Japanese women especially are encouraged to avoid speaking up at all costs, because there can be not only damages to them socially, it can damage their careers and get them fired. And the Liberal Democratic Party, the ruling party of Japan, of the Japanese government, has taken steps to loosen immigration requirements in the traditionally xenophobic country in order to attract immigrant workers, in order to bolster the labor force that's been damaged by population decline. In conclusion, it's become clear from my research that the Japanese government must focus all its reform efforts on fixing the work-family balance of men rather than the female-focused measures they've taken so far. Thank you.
Hi. My name is Sawyer, and my research topic for my Lang 120 class is about the anti-LGBT laws that still exist in North Carolina and the aspects in which Asheville both provides and lacks in terms of support. I made this time-lapsed art piece that represents my criticisms of the city's advocacy, and I interviewed my friend as the voiceover for this after he read my paper. In this interview, I will be talking with Roman Kramer about his experience living in Asheville, as well as discussing the anti-LGBT laws of North Carolina.
How do you personally identify?
I identify as a bisexual trans man.
How long have you lived in Asheville?
I have lived in Asheville for 20 years, and that is how old I am, so my whole life.
What has your experience been living in Asheville as a queer trans person?
You know, it's been mostly good. I notice that a lot of people seem to be either queer or very supporting of queer people in Asheville. Generally, I feel very safe as a queer person.
Have you had any experiences with discrimination within the workplace, schools, or other establishments in the city?
Just like very basic discrimination, sometimes customers, when I worked at my restaurant job, customers would be kind of nasty, but never upfront nasty, just kind of, vaguely dirty glances and all that. Personally, I've never really been like actively discriminated against.
How do you feel about Asheville being advertised as a gay-friendly city?
I have very mixed feelings about that, because as much as I would love for Asheville to be a queer sanctuary, it just doesn't seem like we're all there yet. Also, Asheville is a pocket of safety, but like specifically downtown and West Asheville tend to be very accepting. But if you move out further towards the rural areas, it gets a little more conservative about that. So that's also something that's not great. Asheville has a reputation of being very gay friendly and very like a utopian city almost. Like every time I hear like about tourists who come to visit Asheville, they're like, oh my god, it's like so perfect, everything is so beautiful, the people are so friendly, and on some part they are, and it is a very gorgeous city, but underneath all that gorgeousness, just like any other city, there's a level of phobia, there's a level of fear, there's a level of not understanding what we don't understand, and therefore bad. And the further out you get from the center of the city, the worse it gets. But even in the center of the city, you'll see it in like second glances, dirty looks, mumbles, but it's never directly offensive. It's always very much in the background.
Did you know about these anti-LGBT laws throughout your life?
I started to hear about HB2 around the time it came out. I wasn't out of the closet at that point, so it didn't really affect me. And now that I am out, and I have been for a few years, I never really learned much about it besides the basic, law itself. But, reading from this paper, learning that it actually, has much worse repercussions. There's no protection against trans people. Using bathrooms is just terrifying to me. It's really scary to think that, if I go into a bathroom and I get assaulted, that there's not really much the city will do.
So that was the only law you really knew about?
Yeah.
How has your experience in other cities compared to that of being in Asheville?
I haven't traveled all that much, but when I went to Tennessee to live with an ex-girlfriend for a while, we definitely got some worse treatment than we did in Nashville. We got people kind of leaning out trucks to yell and honking and generally being kind of rude up front. Still not on a hate crime level at all, but definitely a lot less considerate. And it's just a very different vibe from Nashville. You definitely don't feel as safe in other places that I've been to.
How did you feel after reading this paper?
After reading this paper, I felt like, I had been thinking about the safety of Asheville for a while. I walk alone a lot, and sometimes I do, have those, there's stories and they get to your head. But reading this paper made me feel not safer, but at least seen and heard as like a queer individual in Asheville. I feel like a lot of the time news like this and situations like this tend to get covered up and, not really talked about as much, not viewed as important as, other issues. And, some issues definitely deserve the spotlight. But for me to read this about like other people being able to research and looking into the things that, put my life in danger and the people I love in danger, it feels really good to read about. Like, it's an awful situation, and it doesn't make me happy to hear that it's still going on, but it does bring me hope that maybe it'll change. I didn't know about the law that doesn't protect victims of queer domestic violence, or that, if they are protected, they are seen as less of a priority than cisgender heterosexual people who are in similar or the same situations. And that is just, I didn't know that was a law, and I didn't know that that was a thing, and it's just so disgusting to me. It's, treating queer people as something like literally less than human, that we don't even get the basic rights or aren't seen as important or, you know, human enough to be protected in situations that no human should ever have to go through. And it just disgusts me, and it makes me scared because I know a lot of queer people who've been in abusive relationships, and it's just terrifying.
How did you feel learning more about the LGBT youth homelessness epidemic in North Carolina?
You know, I don't have much experience dealing with it very personally. I know that we have a lot of homeless queer youth that aren't getting the help they need, which is awful. I know that, you know, we do have like affordable housing options, and we have like Transmission, and we have all these amazing queer organizations, but there's only so much you can do with the problem we have, and they have. And also thinking about how shelters deal with trans individuals is awful. You know, the separating of trans men into the women's section and the trans women into the men's section is not only like degrading and dehumanizing, but also like dangerous. It's, you know, setting up a recipe for hate crime, and especially like in shelters where tensions are so high and obviously not ideal conditions. Like, it's just awful.
What do you think could be done to help the problems starting in Asheville?
The most important thing, I think, is, you know, to vote senators and local government, vote and empower the people who speak what you believe in. And that is, you know, a good step. And also, you know, donating to different organizations like Transmission and all the others that we have in Asheville to keep resources flowing and keep help readily available, I think are the most important things you can do to help, as well as, you know, making sure you form personal connections with people to hear their stories.
I'm James Nadaski.
And I'm Tyler Farrell. We decided to do our presentation on the evolution of transportation. He did his project or research paper on the automotive industry, and then I did mine on like aircrafts and the aeronautical industry. So basically, whenever we found out that ours were very similar, we kind of just merged our topics together, and then this was the result of it. So I guess we're gonna go ahead and show you this fairly short video. Hopefully you enjoyed as much as we enjoyed making it.
I am James Nadaski.
And I'm Tyler Farrell.
And this is the history of transportation. The reason that I chose this topic is because I have a passion for mechanical things such as cars and planes, and I feel that the history of these mechanical things is extremely interesting and sometimes rather funny.
And I show interest in this topic because I'm interested in the evolution of technology to come into the future. Technology has evolved relatively fast throughout the decades and continues to baffle me with different ideas incorporated in its transportation system.
The history of transportation started a long time ago, but we want to get to the good, interesting part, and so we're starting in the 1860s with Carl Benz when he invented the combustion engine. The engine used gasoline and literal explosions to twist a shaft and transfer chemical energy into mechanical energy. This was done by squeezing then exploding the gas, causing there to be power. These bad boys were put into buggies and made horseless buggies, or cars for the less pretentious folk. They were also used by
the Wright brothers, the father of airplanes. This is their plane right above us, but also the last time you'll see this plane intact. Shortly after this photo, the plane will have crashed into millions of pieces. What you see here is essentially a flying toaster, but seriously, I'm still slightly confused how this plane even flew and took off. This thing was made of a piece of plywood and was powered by a water-cooled engine that produced an astonishing 12 horsepower. The tractor I mow grass with at home is pumping 10 more horsepower than that plane. This plane had a massive wingspan of 40 feet long. So basically, if you're thinking about it, this plane was the same size as a school bus. After this plane was developed, it sparked inventions of many different flying aircrafts that benefited the world, and in many aspects of transportation, one being as a weapon.
Now, at the same time that the Wright brothers were doing their thing, the car was becoming a popular mode of transportation among the wealthy, and was starting to transfer down to the middle class. The reason for this was because of the creation of the middle class due to the industrialization of the late 1800s. This was only the beginning for consumer automobiles, but it wasn't really until the 1920s that the car became an icon. But before the 1920s, there was war.
During World War I, technology was an important factor for helping the Allied powers win with ideas like trench warfare and aerial warfare. The Fokker-Eindecker is not your typical form of air combat because of the way pilots fought in these aircrafts. It started with just reconnaissance, and then somebody finally thought it would be a good idea to fly around a plane and drop bombs on people. Now, the boys in the cockpit had to be really accurate. They didn't have targeting systems, just their wits and judgment. During this time, the pilot or co-pilot did not have a bomb chamber, so they would actually throw it out of the seat that they were piloting the plane in. Now that you think about it, around this time, they had very little instruments to fly this freaking plane. It was a relief that they managed to get these planes off the ground. Shortly after, they added machine guns to the nose of the plane and developed technology called a synchronization gear, which allowed that plane to shoot intermittently between the blades passing through the nose of the plane. This was what happens when that gear comes out of sync. Failure.
After the war, the wealth in America grew and everyone was buying cars, specifically the Ford Model T. However, there was an increase in competition for Ford with Daimler Chrysler and General Motors. These three later became the Big Three and would remain on top of the auto manufacturing for years.
20 years later, in World War II, stuff gets real. Planes become faster, larger, sleek in design, and definitely safer than its predecessors. Some of the iconic planes from World War II were the Spitfire, the B-17, which is also known as the Flying Fortress, and the P-51 Mustang. These planes are the backbone of what the Air Force was during this time. Powerful, strong, and fast. The planes now included a tachometer to let the pilot know how fast they were going, and an altimeter that told the plane's altitude. The plane now included a compass to help pilots head in the right direction when instead of reading those pesky maps, along with helmets that had oxygen pumping into the pilot so they weren't falling asleep at the wheel. These masks also included radios to talk to other pilots. Communication between these guys were important up in the air.
After World War II, the Big Three were still existing, and they would remain pretty powerful in America until the 1960s. From 1945 till the 1960s, the process for making the car was styled after the plane. This can be seen with cars such as the Chevrolet Corvette and the Ford Deluxe. Features such as fins were claimed to help cars be stabilized, which was true, but it was only really helpful at speeds higher than 60 to 70 miles per hour. Another safety feature of these cars was their weight. This was a safety feature by the logic of, if a heavy thing hits a light thing, heavy thing survives, light thing doesn't. While helpful while hitting trees or deers or other objects that get in your way, it doesn't fare well when hitting another object of the same weight or a person. Yeah, the lack of real safety features, plus America realizing that the USSR could topple them with a launch of Sputnik. This sort of failure in the American lifestyle led to Americans looking for less gaudy and expensive things. This counterculture movement started gaining speed at a really fast rate, and this goes for cars as well. An example of this is the company Volkswagen, which prospered off of the counterculture movement with two iconic cars, the Volkswagen Bug and Volkswagen Van. While the car was advancing, it was still slow to get across the country in just a car. To talk about fixing that issue, here's Tyler.
Remember that B-17 and that B-29 I told you about earlier? Well, guess who made them? Boeing. After being contracted to build military planes, they gained a lot of experience and funds to help build their company, or to actually help it take off. Anyway, the company became one of the biggest commercial airliners in the world. They built their brand on being the future and luxury of flying. So today's aircrafts are now fitted with jet engines rather than those old pinwheels on the wings of planes. These planes can pump about 1.25 tons of air per second. That's enough power to suck all the air out of America's largest football stadium in less than 1 minute. This is just one engine. There is 4 on some of our largest aircraft, like the Boeing 747. Speaking of the Boeing 747, this plane can hold 418 passengers and still have room for cargo. And if you thought this was crazy, this isn't even the biggest plane. The Airbus A380 can hold 544 people in this aircraft. And honestly, if all the seats were economy seating, which they're not, you would be able to hold 853 passengers in one aircraft. That's like more than a third of my high school.
While these planes were getting faster, the cars were getting slower. The reason for this is because of the environmental impacts that cars were having. I mean, just look at this picture of New York City. It's brown, and that's not a filter. It's brown. Laws were put in place for the design of cars that forced them to release less gases, mainly carbon dioxide. The big three did not really cope with this very well, and they were making very inefficient engines that cost more to operate. This didn't bother most Americans until the oil OPEC embargo that shortly followed these laws. People realized that American cars were too expensive. Volkswagens were for hippies, and they needed new car manufacturers to go to. Enter the Japanese with cars such as this 1970s Honda Civic. Japanese manufacturers had been making cars that were small and efficient, and the Americans needed something that was small and efficient. Thus, there was a massive increase in Asian automobiles such as Hondas, Toyotas, Nissans, and later Hyundais, Subarus, Mitsubishis, and Kias. In America, eventually became tired of the blandness that came from the Asian cars, and when the oil crisis ended in the late 70s, Americans needed to spend their extra money on nicer cars. This is where the luxury auto cars such as BMWs, Mercedes, Volvo, and Lexus. And these bad boys had all the features, such as this BMW N1, which had features such as half leather and half cloth seats, stereo, power windows, air conditioning, and non-adjustable seats. Or this 2020 Lexus LC500H that has a heads-up display, heated seats, 8-way adjustable seating, a color display, and a myriad of other useful features. And really the main difference between these two cars is just the technical innovation. However, the innovation is not really about the car, it's tech companies that sprung up in America in the 1980s. And there hasn't really been much change to cars recently. Well, there is one thing, and that is electricity. It started with a small startup company called Tesla, which is now one of the most well-known electric car manufacturers in the world. And there was also the help of hybrids with the Toyota Prius. After the success of these two cars, there have been a slow and steady improvement to emissions and speed in electric/hybrid cars, which has increased their popularity. But what is the future of cars? Right now, there are two paths that can be followed and are being pursued. The first is the path of electric cars, such as Teslas, Nissan Leafs, and what have you. And these are fairly popular. They're growing popular. They work well. Their only big con is that it takes 15 to 20 minutes to charge your car as opposed to the 5 minutes it takes at a pump. There is a slightly less popular and more sustainable option, which is hydrogen fuel cells. While these are even more sustainable than electric cars, there is one problem, and that is the fact that when you get in a crash with these, they have a tendency to explode. But what's the future for planes, Tyler?
Well, James, the future of airplanes is quite questionable. There are different ideas for fuel sources and for planes, but none have seemed to be an adequate alternative. One plane that comes to mind is the Solar Impulse. This aircraft was one of the very first solar aircrafts, and it's made a flight that was 24,854 miles long around the world. They flew from Japan to Hawaii and took them only a measly 505 days. While they did land at a few different spots, they only used one energy source, and that was the sun. Today, Boeing, along with many other commercial airliners, own the sky today, with there being as many as 44 million planes in the air daily.
And there are many as 1 billion cars in the world today. Transportation has grown great lengths within the last 100 years and will continue to change. But the question is, Are you ready to take the ride?
Just fucking to the end.
Hi, I'm Madison. Well, yeah, we gotta read the poem first. We're representing Professor Johnson's Lang 120 class that fortunately does not start at 8 a.m. but 9:30.
Which is still early.
Still early, but not half bad. Sorry. You guys want to start with the poem? No? Okay. All right. All right. This is what we discovered. We decided to take excerpts of information that we learned through our infographics and our final research project. To start, Kate is going to walk us through the first few slides.
Okay, so a lot of people focused on the same thing from their infographic to their research project. I don't know if Anyansi did this, but what she did research was very cool. I don't know if many of you guys know this, but in the 1950s, middle class and upper middle class families moved out of the city and into the suburbs because they can afford it, leaving minorities and poor people in the cities to fend for themselves, basically. So the quality of life went down a lot. This is the opposite. The middle class and upper class people are coming back into the cities, pushing the poor class people out. And in her project, she focuses on how that happens in Asheville. I don't know how many have apartments here, but the cost is pretty hefty, and that's why. And she focused on what policymakers can do to support these lower class people, which is provide affordable housing, which is tough to do here. And Wayne Morley focused on capital punishment. He did do the same thing from his infographic to his research project. For his infographic, he focused on the negative aspects of capital punishment. Most people are proven to be innocent later. It's cruel. People are more likely to be euthanized is a bad word, but that's the one I'm going to use, depending on their race, their social, economic standpoints, and things like that. And for his research project, he focused on the evolution of capital punishment throughout the United States. Not all states have abolished this yet, but they're working on it, and that's what he focused on.
Our classmate Blake Little decided to do his research on balancing hobbies and careers and why it's important to do that for mental health. On the left, as you can see, his infographic was on employment and happiness, and he started with fulfillment, which is the satisfaction one gets out of their job. And then he goes on to intrinsic motivation, which is engaging in an activity because you actually enjoy it. And if you lose value of your intrinsic motivation, then you turn into a workaholic. And that's just constantly overworking to just get a paycheck. And actually enjoying your job and your career translates to an increase in skills and skill sets that you can use for the experience and benefits. Benefits such as a paycheck and the experience should be more valued than the benefits in general because it's what actually gives you joy and satisfaction. What do you work harder for? Something you care about or something you don't? Our classmate Madison Nalepa did research on the dietary guidelines for Americans that the government has issued and connects that to the increased rate of obesity, heart disease, cancer, and premature death. In her research, she identifies that the meat and dairy industries have significant economic and political power and that they have manipulated dietary guidelines for their fiscal benefit. She illustrated her findings in this infographic. She connects her research to things we see in our everyday lives, such as the slogan, "Got milk," or "My plate, your fate." This is what she addressed in her research.
All right, secondly, our classmate Ruby Worthy, she focused on something that's important to all of us because we're students, the environment that students have when they're going through elementary school, middle school, high school, and up to the secondary education, college. She talks about the stress that we overcome, or that we undertake, pardon me. That's not what it was before. Something you might want to reflect on is our society has changed a lot over the past 100 years. Social norms have changed, racial acceptance, the variety of things that are different. But our education system hasn't really changed in the last 100 years. It's always been in a classroom, 30 other students, everyone looking in the same direction, everyone learning in the same way. But in her research, she's proposing a more dynamic way of teaching and a more inclusive and, like I said, dynamic education system. She wants to have more support for the average student. Sorry, I know I'm mumbling a little bit, but in light of the increasing suicide rates, personally, I come from a school in Charlotte, and we had 4 students commit suicide in the last 3 years, and it is a very important issue to address, because the mental health of the students nowadays is drastically different, because the environment that we're in is a little cutthroat. It's like, who gets the better grades, gets the best job, gets the best money, has the best living, like higher standard of living. So she found some very valuable things in her research that I think we should all reflect on as students, and should maybe look into our own research if you think about it a little bit more. Secondly, Ruth Perez, one of our students in our class, decided to focus on drug addiction and how it affects young adults. She read several young adult novels that address this issue. For example, she read Dope Stick by Dean Myers. It's about a student who dropped out of high school who's predispositioned to become an addict due to his parents being addicted. And here's an analogy for that. It's if you take a loan, say it's $3,000, your interest rate after 3 months might be $10, and then 5 months might be $20, and then a year later it'll be $50. It compounds over time. If your parents are addicted to something, you are more likely to be addicted. If you are more likely to be addicted, your children are even more likely to become addicts. Down the family tree, it increases over time. And that's a serious issue, and something that's not always addressed in education forums for young adults, because it's important for us to recognize that. She hits on the fact that drug addiction can be triggered by relatives having addictions, traumatic events, or social or economic backgrounds, and how that can influence their day-to-day life. So in other words, young adults tend to turn to drugs, and they develop addictions because they feel like their problems are unsolvable. And whatever relief they can find, no matter what it is something that they're going to turn to due to lack of coping mechanisms that they haven't been able to build over time. And last, but hopefully not least, is my research. I focused on the benefits of listening to heavy metal. I titled it Health and Headbanging. Heavy metal addresses difficult emotions that we all experience, and it helps us cope and mature, and when we have the tendency to put our feelings on the back burner. It's an abrasive way of talking about when you're angry or when you're sad. It helps you address these things that in society people don't really want to look at or think about. And so in other words, heavy metal is best fit to articulate complex social issues and express unconventional emotions that we all see. For an analogy, if you have a bucket, every time you get angry, you put those emotions in your bucket. Every time you get sad, you put those emotions in your bucket. And you always keep it behind you. You don't want to look at it. You want to deal with it because it's uncomfortable, and it is uncomfortable, but it's important to keep these uncomfortable things in your life. But anyway, with my analogy, over time, your problems get worse, and the emotions get more aggravated and more enhanced. And because you aren't paying attention to them, you aren't building the skills to deal with them. Because you've never dealt with them, even as a child or as you grow up, when it gets to a point where you can't avoid it, you won't be able to avoid it because your bucket's overflowing and you're too angry and you're too sad to deal with things like feelings of betrayal and whatnot. And what I found is that heavy metal gives you a safe medium to address these issues in moderation. You can listen to a song that helps you connect and articulate the anger you're feeling, or helps you connect to the emotions of betrayal or abandonment or whatever you're feeling at that time. For the second phase of my research, I made a website, and I created 4 playlists. The first one was anger and hate. The second one was addressing sadness and loss. The third was helplessness. And the fourth was abandonment and betrayal. While these are entirely subjective, I listened to these songs when I was going through situations like that. My mother had abandoned me, and listening to music helped me deal with those problems and find a way to communicate those emotions in a healthy, safe way. Because if you let them build up, it's going to explode, and you hurt someone, or you hurt yourself, or your reputation, things like that. So I learned a lot about how heavy metal can help you. And while it might be a little, that's a little weird, maybe sit down and listen to some YouTube videos about heavy metal. Yeah, this is what we discovered. Thank you for listening.
All right, let's go listen to some heavy metal now. Y'all should be proud of yourself. Thanks for coming. Very good work. Now, good luck on the rest of your activities and exams, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.